Upon entering, the sunbeams illuminated her. Richard Gere is a name that many will recognize from his roles in American Gigolo and Pretty Woman. Not a single role, film, or achievement was mentioned by him. Everyone was momentarily halted by the fact that he solely mentioned a woman. Love isn't about discovering the perfect person. It's about being the perfect person at the right time, according to a man who had 3 marriages and was once hailed as Hollywood's most charming gentleman. Once upon a time, he was the center of attention in Hollywood and the media. He was married to a top supermodel and had affairs with some of the world's most stunning women. However, he waited until he was nearly 70 years old to find a relationship that he could let go of. It was an unforced love and a woman who stayed with him instead of trying to change him. Richard Gere was once informed she is the true love of his life. This is more than just a love story involving a famous actor. It's the story of a man's journey from stardom to isolation, from terror to calm, from dominance to comprehension. A journey to learn love not by innate capacity, but through maturation. Back when he was a lanky student at UMass Amherst, Richard Gere was a lanky trumpet player and composer for school productions. He later becomes famous as a romantic movie star. The theater, though, offered him the chance to play a different role and experience a new life, so he left everything behind to pursue it. From an early age, Richard Gere may have grown accustomed to playing the nice guy, whether in real life or on screen. His attractiveness and peculiar, reserved demeanor made him a womanizer at all times. However, Richard's early relationships were fleeting, much like his indefinable personality. Potent enough to produce an intoxicating effect, but never lasting. Carol Mallory, a heated model who referred to him as a jewel shooting across the sky, was one of them. Penelope Milford, his Days of Heaven co-star who remained by his side throughout the 1970s. Dawn Steele, an editor at Penthouse who would later become the first female head of a major U.S. film studio. And Sylvia Martins, the woman who escorted him to Nepal, introduced him to Tibetan lamas, and opened the door to meditation and Buddhism. These ladies were stunning, intelligent, and courageous. However, Richard Gere's quest to discover who he was at the time included love, but it was only a small part of it. There was an improvement following looking for Mr. Even though he had been to Good Bar, Days of Heaven, and American Gigolo, he had never been taught how to keep a woman. Despite his outward charisma, Richard Gere appeared to be hollow on the inside. Everything seemed to blend together, from the camera flashes and party whispers to the lonely nights spent in hotel rooms after filming. Perhaps that's why he was never serious about settling down. Because he was still naive about his needs, he was unable to commit or trust any of the women who came and went. His sole certainty was that he was living life on the edge and was in no condition to slow down. At a BBQ in Beverly Hills in 1988, Richard Gere, who was 39 years old, met Cindy Crawford, who was 22 years old and had recently been featured on the covers of the world's top fashion magazines. Photographer Herb Ritz hosted the celebration. They were from completely different origins. She was on the cusp of a meteoric rise in the fashion industry, and he had a reputation for being the most handsome man alive. After that, they unexpectedly and deeply fell in love. Not long after that, they made New York City their joint home. The world was taken aback by this couple, the ultra-chic and sophisticated Richard Gere and the stunning Cindy Crawford. They graced red carpets, advertisements, and magazine covers throughout the 90s, solidifying their status as the world's most famous couple. There was a marked difference in the pace of movement between the two people. Cindy had only just begun to discover who she was. As a young woman who had grown up too fast in a glamorous world, she was confused about the difference between her true self and the one she put out to the world. In order to satisfy the people who wanted her to become a real brand, she worked tirelessly to maintain her shape for photo shoots and promotions. Richard, on the other hand, was sick of being Hollywood's dream man after 20 years. In an effort to achieve inner calm, he meditated, performed volunteer work, and sought out remote areas free of prying eyes. Their 1991 Las Vegas wedding was private with no invited guests or media present. With silver foil rings, it was an intimate affair. Two individuals clinging to a beauty that was beginning to fade. That was all. But being apart won't make getting married any easier. While Richard pondered, Cindy boarded planes. In spite of his inaction, she persisted in developing into the woman he required. She remarked, "I tried to become the woman he needed, and then I lost myself." It was as if they were living together. There was no scandal, no betrayal. There was just less and less communication. Timetables and emotions were no longer compatible. In 1995, they were able to finalize their divorce without a hitch. Because they were at a loss for words, the news outlets simply left the subject open. Why did the picture-perfect couple decide to part ways? Nearly 30 years later, Richard finally spoke. "I loved a woman who didn't know who she was yet, and I thought love could help her find stability, but that was an unfair expectation. Everyone was perfectly fine. They simply didn't cross paths at the optimal moment. The other had already touched down, while the first one was still in the air." Richard Gere cut ties with rowdy women after his breakup with Cindy Crawford. He had moved on from appearing on magazine covers alongside youthful supermodels. Rather, he avoided the spotlight, spent time in meditation and travel around Asia, immersed himself in Tibetan Buddhism, and portrayed slower, more serious roles in films. He met the stunning, seasoned, and composed actress Gere, a former Bond girl from License to Kill, after enduring an emotional low point. There was no flash or noise from Gere. Richard erroneously believed he had reached his destination because it appeared to be a peaceful place. They began going out in 1995 and kept to themselves at first. The year 2000 saw the birth of their son, Homer James Jigmar. The first time Richard became a dad was when he was 51 years old. In 2002, they tied the knot in a modest ceremony that was shrouded in secrecy away from the prying eyes of the media. Richard grew vegetables, read books, made a few films, and kept up his humanitarian work, while Gere spent most of her time being a mother in Pound Ridge, New York, away from the limelight. Parallel waiting makes steadiness appear less constant than it actually is. Even though they appeared to be in no hurry, two individuals were gradually pulling apart. Shy and reserved, Richard kept to himself. While on vacation in Nepal or Tibet, he would meditate for hours on end. Concepts of solitude and tranquility captivated him. Despite spending less time in front of the camera, Gere still required connection, movement, and social space to feel alive. They started to appear less and less frequently together at parties and movie premieres as time went on. Only one would actually go. Timetables were out of whack. Though not spoken aloud, the silence began to speak volumes. Gere did in fact initiate the divorce process in 2013. They were married for 11 years after being together for 18. Close friends and family claimed a lack of compatibility was at the root of the problem, but investigation revealed that Gere actually felt alienated from her husband's life. There was a house she lived in, but she had no idea how to communicate with its ghosts. Contrarily, Richard continued to believe that remaining silent signified tranquility. He failed to grasp the concept that prolonged silence does not constitute peace until chaos ensues. It was also unheard of by me. It was a lengthy process to separate. For an extended period, Gere, despite their breakup, Richard and Gere agreed to split the costs of raising their son, Homer. Following in his father's footsteps, Homer is sensitive and composed. Dissolving the marriage took 3 years due to financial issues rather than mental health issues. More than $45 million, 0 cents in assets, and multiple pieces of real estate were the subject of multiple court cases. They made a positive decision despite the stress. They would share the care of Homer. Following their split, Richard and Carrie avoided the media. Somewhere, something was profoundly broken and silent. Nobody was dishonest or malicious. The only reason this happened was because two people were too open about their identities and couldn't touch anymore. Richard Gere's public profile plummeted after his work with Carrie Lowell. He skipped out on signing autographs, posing for photos on the red carpet, and attending award ceremonies. Many assumed he had resolved to spend the rest of his life as a dad, meditating and contemplating the meaning of existence. Yet in 2014, at the very moment he believed he had discovered love, she entered his life. Padma Lakshmi, a model, author, and host of Top Chef, appeared with Richard Gere while his breakup with Carrie Lowell was ongoing. Although the media took an interest in the couple, no concrete evidence of their relationship materialized beyond rumors and the absence of any public interviews or photos of them holding hands. Richard and Padma had a long conversation behind the scenes at a charity gala. They were also spotted sharing meals on occasion. Back then, both of their bodies were marked with scars. Richard was divorcing his wife of 18 years, and Padma had recently broken up with wealthy Ted Forstman, her daughter's spiritual father, and was recovering from a painful breakup. It was more like they understood each other than love when they were together. Rumor has it that Richard discovered a peaceful happiness with Padma during their brief courtship. He wasn't required to play a role during their lengthy conversations or casual meals. However, they were both aware that they were at completely different stages of life. Richard desired tranquility, solitude, and contemplation. In contrast, Padma was well-liked, full of life, and fascinated by the excitement of television and current events. They ended things amicably after 6 months, so neither of them felt bad about themselves. Nothing criminal or violent. Their lives were already so busy and diverging that they decided to remain friends, according to one close friend. Richard Gere, who had slowed down and stopped loving due to loneliness or trying to fill a hole, was the only thing that remained with me from this brief relationship. He realized that love isn't sufficient to hold on to someone and that it's not always possible to make people get along. Perhaps that's where the subtle yearning to seek disappeared. Without aspirations or intentions, Richard Gere ceased to exist. He shifted his focus from seeking love to hoping for a miracle. Right then and there, Alejandra Silva entered his life for the very last time. She kept to herself, didn't try to force him, and didn't require his support. So the old adage goes, when you stop looking for love, love finds you. After 3 marriages, a series of intense but brief relationships, and years of bouncing between retreats and film sets, Richard Gere finally gave up chasing and trying to prove anything. Alejandra Silva entered his life at that very moment. A Spanish woman named Alejandra Silva, who has gentle blonde hair, serene eyes, and the kind soul of a social worker, never imagined falling in love again. Neither her beauty nor her stage presence could compare to that of Cindy Crawford or Carrie Lowell. She was running the Rise Foundation, which helped the impoverished in Madrid, and she was also raising her child alone after getting a divorce. She knew what it was like to be homeless because she had slept on the streets. A few years ago, I don't do charity work to be seen. I do it because if I can't give my whole self to it, I'd rather not do it at all. She was staying at a hotel owned by her family when they met in Positano, Italy in 2014. Gere was secretly divorcing his second wife at that moment. She too was exhausted and mired in paperwork related to her divorce. However, when they locked eyes, the past remained invisible. On the contrary, they imagined a future where they could work together in harmony, gently and stealthily, Richard Gere stepped forward. Without trying to win her heart, he sent her handwritten letters, daily flowers, and brief songs to let her know, "I'm ready to stay if you need someone by your side." Initially, Alejandra declined,